12 because that's the one that's in that photograph.
Okay. Yeah, cool. Those are this one and this year was the trainer here, and then this is the U.S. Army plane.
Yeah.
So, are you staying for the party?
I'll be here on the Saturday, and I'm going to the Remembrance
Great. Have
ceremony.
you been to it before?
I went to the Remembrance ceremony when the Falcon Field Association was active. I was out here on business and managed to coordinate that, and that was 2003. So I met Bill McCash and Ken Beebe and Stan Wally, who was actually, I think, on course 24, my dad's course.
Oh, great.
So yeah.
It just goes right
Oh,
in
do
here.
you want me to hide that
Only
away?
see it, but I can sort of see it. We're rolling. I know,
Okay.
but we don't want anybody freaking out. We're electronic. Perfect. Much better.
Let me get rid of that. How does that?
Here we go. Now it's making noise. Okay, tell us your name and then spell your last name for us, please.
Okay, so my name is Peter Dickinson, Dickinson.
So it's an I-N-S-O-N. To see?
It is today, but in the past, having done the family tree, it was anything from
Yeah, there's no
Dicken to
Okay.
etc.
Make sure so what was your dad's name and what course?
So my father was on course 24, and his name was John Dickinson.
And he went by John or Jack or?
He went by John.
Yeah. Good. Okay. Yeah, you got some great pictures. I saw the pictures of your dad there. It's cool. Did he? So he came in one of the later courses.
Yes.
How old was he when he came over, and what year was that?
So he would have arrived here in November 44, at which point he would have been around about 19. Yeah.
And did you know a lot about his time here? Did he talk about it, or is this something you found out later in life?
He talked about it quite a lot. I think, you know, for a lot of the students that came out here, this must have been an incredibly transformative period for them. And you know, they'd come from war-torn England, where they'd had blackouts and, you know, the Blitz and rationing, and they're transported to this amazing landscape. And I mean, yeah, he absolutely loved it. He always had a real interest in the natural world, and he just found, yeah, Arizona a really fascinating place, and he loved to talk about it.
And so tell us a little bit, did he talk about how he got here to start with his journey?
Yeah, well, I mean, just to go back, I mean, he'd been interested in flying from a boy, because back in the early 30s, his father had bought him a flight in one of the barnstorming planes that were going around at the time, Alan Cobham's Flying Circus. And so during the war, he joined the Air Training Corps at his school, and had it in mind to join the RAF. So when he reached 18 in 1943 and left school, he again joined the Air Training Corps, and then he got called up and he was selected for the RAF. And he went through the process of pilot selection. He went to Scotland, where he did his initial training on Tiger Moth aircraft, and then from that they were going to be sent abroad to have their full training. And at that point there was a huge backlog of students waiting to go abroad, so he spent some time with the RAF in Lincolnshire in England, helping out with a bomber squadron, until he was called up to go to the USA. So from Lincolnshire he went up to Scotland. He got on the RMS Aquitania, and they travelled across the Atlantic to New York. And he told me that they'd be zigzagging, changing course every 19 minutes to avoid the U-boats. Finally arrived in New York, and then took the train up to Moncton in Canada. And at that point they were interviewed. I think there were 6 flying training schools that they could go to, and he was asked if he had any relatives over here. And we have had and do have relatives in California. So they said, okay, you're going to Mesa, Arizona. So that's how he came to come here, and yeah, he kept a good record of his travels from Canada all the way down through Chicago and Kansas to Phoenix, and then of his time here. So yeah, it was something I grew up with.
Flock of bees. That one, whatever that is. That's a little loud, but that one's kind of yeah.
Have you had this all day?
Have we? Oh yeah, yeah. We've been at it for a long time, 3 years. Yeah, all day for sure. Where do you live now?
So I actually live in Cardiff in Wales, if you know the UK.
Yeah.
I grew up in Bath, which is where my family came from, and then I moved to Wales about 30 years ago.
Still not perfect, but it's better. Not perfect, but better. But yeah, we wanted to take this opportunity for people that were traveling over here to at least talk to some people. We were able to interview some of the remaining veterans this summer in England.
That's great.
2 of them were over 100 years old. They were great.
Amazing.
Yeah, still kind of just kicking. They all said, yeah, they all remember their time, first person.
Yeah.
They had a lot of similar memories, but they talked about the food mostly.
Yeah. I was very fortunate as well. I was able to meet my father's primary training instructor, Jim Montgomery, because Jim worked for US Airways. I guess it was. No, Southwest Airways, wasn't it? Yeah. Can't really compete with that, can you? Anyway,
So you got
Dad came across here for the get together that they had here back in the 80s, and he met Jim again then, at which point Jim was living up in Seattle, and as growing up in Seattle as another customer, I used to go and visit Jim up there. So it was great, so I used to be able to.
Did you compare stories and get some other stories about what these guys got up to?
Yeah, some of them are probably not repeatable.
That's the ones we want.
Yeah, so yeah.
Not that
Yeah, Dad.
19-year-old boys would be up to anything, all above board, I'm sure, but.
Yeah. No, I remember my father was saying that, because obviously when Falcon Field was started, there was nothing out here apart from the orange groves, and back in England, scrumping, as they call it, is sort of a bit of tradition for youngsters. They'll sort of shin over a wall and go and raid an apple orchard. So they go and raid the orange orchards. It was probably about the most exciting thing they could do around here. But yeah.
What's that called?
Scrumping.
See, we don't speak that. We speak like scrumping. I think they did more things than that. They seem to.
I'm sure they did worse things than that, yes. I believe that when the boat docked in New York, there were quite a lot of, there was a big sort of greeting party there at which, yeah, the ladies were. Oh, sorry.
Look at me.
Yeah, sorry, I wasn't sure. Are you recording this?
Yeah.
Oh,
No,
right.
Just look at me.
Yeah.
Tell
No.
me.
Yeah. So when they arrived in New York, the boat pulled alongside the quay, and there were bands and whatever. And I believe that the crowds below were greeted with these balloons which fell on them from above, being prophylactic balloons. But these were young men who'd been stuck on board a boat for the best part of a week or more. So anyway, yeah. So he arrived here in Arizona. He had his first flight in a Stearman on the 20th of November '44. Did his flying training with Jim Montgomery, his primary instructor, through Christmas and into the early New Year, and then transferred onto the 86 with Ray Shelton, who was his instructor there, and carried on. did his last flight on the 11th of June 1945 and got his wings on the 16th of June 45. And then of course they were all shipped back home. The war in Europe was over by then. Got back. The war in the the Far East was still going on. So at that point he was put on to a jungle survival training course with a view that he could be shipped out to go to Japan or Burma, Myanmar as it is now. No, it wasn't over.
Yeah, so these guys got sent to Africa or something. They weren't sent to the Pacific. I don't think they were. Any of them.
Yeah, the war in Burma is carried on, really until the bitter end. It wasn't until the Japanese really surrendered that they stopped fighting in Burma.
Who knows? Yeah, he's probably going to run back up. So what did he do there, though, if he wasn't a pilot? Did he come out and get his wings and become a pilot?
Well, he got his wings here, of course.
Right.
So at that point, the war in Europe being over, he was doing his jungle survival training with a view to being posted out to fight in Asia.
It looks amazing, though. I know it's quieter in there, but this looks great. Yeah, this is very, very interesting. It's easy to look. Something's gonna happen. He's like, really? Yes.
Anyway, he was just about wrapping up the jungle survival training when the first bomb dropped on Hiroshima, and that was basically the end. And at that point, there wasn't really much of a future in terms of flying within the RAF. They had thousands of pilots. He was of a view that he wasn't going to sit behind a desk, for the next year or whatever it was until they demobbed him. So he actually joined the RAF regiment, which is the RAF's ground protection force that protects the airfields. And so he went to officer training in the UK. He got his commission in the RAF regiment, and then he was posted out to Germany in the British zone. He was with 84 Group, which was part of the 2nd Tactical Air Force, the British Air Forces of occupation as they then were in 1946. And so he was out there in RAF Celle. He was in charge of a armoured car squadron, and they would rotate these round from RAF Celle to RAF Gata, which was in West Berlin in the British sector. And so he would take these armoured cars up through the Russian zone to Berlin and would then go on patrol around Berlin. And that's where the picture of him.
Describe that picture, because
that
picture is amazing.
Yeah, so there he is. That picture was actually taken by a professional photographer for a magazine called Picture Post that was around at the time. And it shows him leading his flight of 2 Humber armoured cars sitting in front of the Brandenburg Gate, the ruined Brandenburg Gate as it was at that point. And so they would go on patrol around Berlin, right up to the Brandenburg Gate, which was of course the demarcation line between the British and the Russian zones. and he would say that they would get a fair amount of trouble from the Russians when they were driving up the one and only road to Berlin from the British zone. The Russians would take delight at shooting out the lights on their cars. Other than that, it was once they were in Berlin, it was a question of just sort of maintaining law and order.
It wasn't too easy, actually, at the time. That was a pretty dangerous assignment with Russians and with everybody in their own zone. That was a terrible idea.
Yeah, and so he got roped into various things. There was, various things happened. They had an RAF Tempest crashed in the Russian zone, and they had to go and get the pilot back from the Russians, who weren't awfully helpful. And the Russians equally, quite liked firing shells across into the British zone onto the airfield. So he'd have to look after, making those safe. So all in all, he had quite a time there, I think. And he was there through the winter of 46, 47, when that photograph in front of the Brandenburg Gate was taken. And then came to the end of his tour, returned to the UK, and was demobbed. In reality, he would have liked to have stayed in the RAF, I'm sure. But he had...
Where did he end up going?
Yeah, so he finished his tour, came back to the UK, and was then demobbed. His father ran a pharmacy, and really it was called on to go and help out in the pharmacy. His elder brother, his half brother, had been out in India before the war with a pharmaceutical company, and was originally planned to come back and take over the pharmacy from my grandfather. As it was, when the war started, he joined the Indian Army, which became part of the 8th Army. He fought his way through the Middle East, through Egypt, through Tobruk, into Sicily. Sorry. He finished up being killed. Anyway, so my father eventually had to take on the responsibilities he would have had. He was very close to his brother. So he finished up. After leaving the RAF, he actually joined the RAF Volunteer Reserve, because the RAF was everything to him. And he took on, he became the officer commanding 93 Squadron Air Training Corps in Bath, which was the squadron he'd originally been part of. And he stayed with that until 1955, when he basically resigned his commission. And yeah, probably my fault actually, because I came along in 1954.
Could have been your fault.
So, but
So did he ever? At that time, are you a pilot? Because you were just talking about, did you become a pilot?
Well, it was very difficult not to be influenced, by people of that generation. And I started out to become a pilot. I did my flying training. Quite expensive in the UK. I was doing it as a student. I got all the way to doing my solo. I was waiting to just finish it off and get my license, but it was had to be done in a six-month window, and I just ran out of time.
But you're still in aviation, right?
I'm still in aviation. I actually did get a pilot's license, but not on fixed wing. As it happened, I went to university in London, where I did my research doctorate and finished up starting a hot air balloon club. So I got my pilot's license in hot air balloons instead, which is great fun. Completely useless way of going anywhere in particular, but great for going from A to B, as long as you don't mind where B is particularly. So yeah, I got my pilot's license in balloons instead. You know, maybe one day I'll come back out here and finish my flying training here instead, which would be great. But yeah, after that I joined what is now BAE Systems, British Aerospace. And so I've been in the aerospace industry ever since the 1980s. So that's my background.
So you do come back, and like I said, Boeing's a client. That's why you've been back here this time.
Yeah, so essentially we supply very specialized industrial laser equipment to the aerospace industry. We supply just about everybody there is on the planet, but most of our customers are over here. Around about 60% of our business is in North America, so I generally come to the US 2 or 3 times a year. Except, of course, this is the first time I've been able to come here for 2 years. So this is sort of,
So what brought you back, when you came back for the first time to Mesa, and you had heard the stories, and your first trip back here, what did you come see, and what did you think when you were able to actually see this place that your dad talked about?
Oh yeah, well, I was just totally wowed by it. I mean, it's been, you know, a great coincidence that I've been able to come specifically to Falcon Field. When I first came here in 1989, I came to visit the Boeing facility. It was McDonnell Douglas back then, and came to make a technical presentation to them on our products and our technology, and was able to come and see the remnants of the old cadet lounge across the way from here, see the hangars, and they had the Champlain Fighter Museum here at the time, so I had a look around that as well. And yeah, absolutely fascinating. I've just been extremely lucky and very privileged to visit so many different aerospace companies over time. The people I deal with, I've been able to go, you know, down final production lines, so many different places, not just in here, but in Europe, and many of those places are, you know, have got wartime associations. So I've got customers in southern Germany, at Augsburg, where they're currently building the Eurofighter. But back in the war, it was a German Luftwaffe station, and they built Me-109s there, and you can still see the marks from the shelling from the British and the American fighters.
The British seem a little closer to the history, World War II history, but you know, than Americans, because we kind of move on pretty fast. But yeah, sometimes it seems like it's yesterday when you're there.
Yeah.
I was just going.
Yeah.
Yeah, good. We're good. So is there, as you come back right now, what do you think is the importance of having people come back? Just to talk about descendants, you know, keeping the memories alive, and is it important that the history goes on?
Yes, it's incredibly important. Yes. Yeah, but I mean, it's important for future generations.
You gotta get, this is gonna be your big finish. You gotta get this one. This guy goes. Doing good. We're doing good. We're there. This is, yeah, because we have to talk about what we're doing is important and why we're here. Everybody came back here. I mean, we only have almost 300 people here that are coming for Saturday, and just the amount of people that have been, you know, just these people are volunteering their time. We volunteered our time.
No, I think it's brilliant.
Yeah. It's one of those things where, yeah, I know it's important, but I need you.
Yeah. No.
That's funny, you know. Okay, so is it important that you're here? Is it important that
It's important for me personally to be here, of course, because of my personal memories and my links through my father to this place, but it's also important for all the other people that came here and trained, and those that didn't survive the war, and people need to remember. So it is important, and I hope that, you know, through this film that future generations will learn, and, you know, they won't forget.
Do you think the majority, and I mean the majority of people in this is just maybe curiosity, in the UK, do they know that these guys came to Arizona and went back to fight? Do you think they knew that?
Probably not. I mean, the families of people who came here would know it, but the average person probably has no idea, particularly nowadays. That was a DC-3. Yeah, so I think, yeah, probably most people have got no idea about the history of the RAF coming over.
Over 13,000 cadets came to the U.S. and 2,000 came here.
Yeah.
So that's, I mean, it's kind of, I mean, maybe not a lot in the big scheme of the war, but, you know, out of those guys, half of them didn't survive the war.
Yeah.
So, but I mean, and they were probably better trained than they were there. But yeah, I mean, just in general, I'm just saying, if you had a message, maybe a little bit of a message for the people in the UK that said, you know, that you would say, well, yeah, this.
Yeah, this is an important part of history of the UK, of the RAF during the Second World War, that people probably just don't know about, and it's an important part. It was an important part for the RAF before the US came into the war, and for people to realise that there were people over here that were trying to help before America joined the war, because quite often the view is that, you know, that wasn't the case, and you know, people in Britain felt, I'm sure, very alone through 1940 and 41. You know, they had a tough time. I know my father saw the Blitz on Bath. He lived in Bath, and he came home from school in the spring of 1942, just at the time they had the Baedeker raids on Bath. And I remember he told me very graphically how he watched the German bombers coming in over the south of the city, diving down, dropping their bombs across the centre, and then pulling up on the north side where he lived on the hills. And at one point there was a German bomber came up the hill, dropped a stick of incendiaries which dropped by the side of his parents' house, and then there was another high explosive bomb dropped in a garden adjacent to them and went off and just sucked all the windows out. So they went through all of that, you know, through that period, and yeah, it would have been, I'm sure, extremely frightening. And yeah, at the time when basically Britain was, you know, fighting on its own, but there were things happening here. You know, Falcon Field, and the establishment of Falcon Field and those other training schools is important for that reason.
Good words, yes.
Yeah.